Welcome to the Cannabis Plant, a Clinical Perspective, Putting It All Together Learning section. As discussed in previous sections, there is much more to the clinical effect of cannabis than THC or CBD alone. The cannabinoids, flavonoids, and terpenes found in cannabis all contribute to the efficacy of the plant. Thus far, attempts to isolate one active ingredient of cannabis have proven unsuccessful in recreating the effect of whole plant medicine. We call this the entourage effect, which is the idea that the combination of cannabinoids, terpenes, flavonoids, and other as yet unidentified compounds within cannabis all contribute to the clinical effect in patients. This figure neatly summarizes the entourage effect by showing the most commonly occurring cannabinoids and their clinical effects, along with the terpenes and flavonoids found in cannabis. Each individual component can serve as a functional wheel on its own, but when the wheels are combined, a much larger wheel is formed, representing the additive effect seen with whole plant cannabis medicine. It should come as no surprise that this complicated plant is only just beginning to be understood. Often, a discussion of cannabis dosing will lead you down a path of the sativa versus indica dosing theory. As mentioned in our opening section, cannabis sativa and cannabis indica are two different subspecies of the cannabis plant. In recreational nomenclature, a sativa cannabis plant typically produces a head high, which is thought to be stimulating and promote creativity, whereas an indica cannabis plant is thought to produce a body high, which is thought to be more sedating and relaxing. However, this idea of dosing and effect is based on bad science and outdated plant morphology. Today, most cannabis cultivars are actually hybrids of the traditional sativa and indica varietals. Genetic testing has even shown that many varietals known colloquially as indicas are actually genetically sativas, and vice versa. A case in point of this is the cannabis species known as AK-47, a hybrid plant that won Best Sativa in the 1999 Cannabis Cup and won Best Indica a mere 4 years later. You should also note that the use of strain to describe cannabis varietals has become very common, especially in the adult use and illicit markets. However, strains should be used to refer to bacteria or viruses, and the terms varietal or cultivar are much more appropriate to use when referring to the cannabis plant. Taking all of this into consideration, when looking at cannabis from a clinical perspective, if we are unable to reliably predict the clinical effects of cannabis cultivars based on the plant species, the question remains, how do we properly go about predicting the clinical effect of cannabis plants? A more clinically sound cannabis dosing methodology is to focus on ratio-based therapeutics, which is the idea that patient outcomes can be predicted based upon the cannabinoid and terpene composition of the plant. High THC plants are more likely to cause intoxication, whereas a high CBD plant is more likely to be calming, and a plant with equal representation of CBD and THC will have a more balanced effect. Plant cultivars are now being assigned types based upon their cannabinoid composition, with type 1 plants being high in THC, type 2 plants having both THC and CBD represented equally, and type 3 plants being rich in CBD. This method of dosing can also be applied to the minor cannabinoids found in cannabis and the percentage to which they are represented within each individual plant varietal. A more comprehensive look at cannabis dosing can be found in the pharmacology module of this certification program. These graphics represent an even more comprehensive look at the ratio-based therapeutics idea combined with entourage effect information. In these schematics, the cannabis plant composition is broken down not only into individual cannabinoids and to what percentage they are represented within the plant, but also the individual terpenes and the effect of those terpenes within each individual plant varietal. In the examples shown, each sheet represents a different cannabis varietal. The two varietals have a very similar cannabinoid composition. However, when you look at their terpene profiles, they are in fact quite different. One varietal has a more relaxing, sedating terpene profile, while the other is more stimulatory and focus building. This sort of fine-tuned information will enable you to better choose a plant varietal based on patient need once cannabinoid ratio and percentage has been best determined. In addition to detailed plant cultivar reports, as shown in the previous slide, several companies are also beginning to collect patient-reported outcomes on individual plant varietals and aggregate that data to give clinicians a better understanding of the perceived effects of each varietal of cannabis plant. This aggregated data is anecdotal at best, but it can help formulate the basis of future clinical studies looking into the efficacy of different plant cultivars for different disease states. This data can also be used to inform future patient consultations. With the lack of clinical evidence currently available, some of these patient-reported outcomes, especially when large populations of patients are involved, represent some of the best information we have in recommending specific cannabis ratios and varietals to our patients. Even more importantly, this information can be used to steer patients away from cultivars that may exacerbate their symptoms or interact inappropriately with their current medications or disease states. In summary, cannabis is a plant with origins in Asia that has now been dispersed worldwide and has become naturalized in the United States. Cannabis exerts its clinical effect through cannabinoids, terpenes, and flavonoid compounds. Cannabinoids interact with endogenous cannabinoid and non-cannabinoid receptors and/or influence endocannabinoid levels within the body to exert their effects. The entourage effect is the combined effect of the many active ingredients found within the cannabis plant. When determining how to recommend cannabis for patients, it is important to look at the entire picture of each cannabis varietal and not just at the cannabinoid levels or species designation. This concludes the Cannabis Plant, a Clinical Perspective Learning module. Thank you for joining us.